Thank you. Just one last quick question, because a few of us were debating yesterday, and I was trying to maintain true to the saying that the infinite can only know the infinite and the finite can only know the finite. Is the implication of that infinite consciousness, God, does not know our suffering, or that can't read our minds, doesn't know our thoughts?
Yeah.
And in that way is not omniscient in the way we think of omniscience.
It's omniscient in the sense that everything that is known is ultimately known by consciousness, but consciousness cannot know objective experience directly. In order to know an objective experience, it must do so through a separate subjective experience.
And that's us.
And that's us. So we are like, yes, we are like the eyes and ears of God, through which God perceives its own activity as the universe. In order to know a finite object, infinite consciousness must do so from the perspective of a finite subject. In fact, the finite object and the finite subject arise together. You can't have a finite subject by itself. The finite subject can only stand in relation to the object that it knows. And an object cannot stand alone. It can only stand in relation to the subject that knows it. So the subject and an object are co-created in infinite consciousness. And that is the mechanism through which the potential that lies in infinite consciousness is realized in form. So still, whatever is known by consciousness. In that sense, consciousness is omniscient. Go on.
Sorry, because it is everything, so it must know it's the only thing it can know itself, and it is everything.
Yes.
But I'm assuming it's not the knowledge of it the way we colloquially say knowledge and meaning, subject-object split, and knowing a subject, knowing a thought, knowing an aspect of suffering. Yes,
but the knowing with which each of us know our experience is infinite consciousness. Okay, time for Mary and Jane. Some old friends asked me at breakfast this morning why Mary and Jane hadn't made an appearance for a few years. Okay, time to bring Mary and Jane back. You're familiar with my dream analogy. So Mary falls asleep in Burlingame, and she dreams that she's Jane on the streets of Paris. Now, when we normally fall asleep, if we're Mary when we fall asleep in Burlingame, we tend to be Mary on the streets of Paris, but I just changed the name for ease of reference. So Mary falls asleep in Burlingame, she dreams she's Jane on the streets of Paris. So Jane doesn't realize she's just a localization of Mary's mind. Jane thinks I am a separate individual person, and that the knowing with which I perceive the streets of Paris lives just behind my eyes, and this seems to be corroborated by experience. She closes her eyes, the streets of Paris disappear. She opens them, they reappear. She presumes that whatever it is that perceives them lives in her head, just behind the eyes. That's what most people think. So, but the knowing with which Jane perceives the streets of Paris doesn't live in Jane's head. It doesn't live in her body. It doesn't exist anywhere in Jane's world. It exists in another dimension that Jane cannot be aware of because her own mind limits what she can be aware of. But the knowing with which Jane knows her experience is Mary's mind. But Mary cannot view the streets of Paris directly. She has to do so through the character of Jane. Mary has to overlook the infinite nature of her mind, relatively speaking, within the limitations of the analogy. Mary has to localize herself. She has to contract into, she has to imagine the streets of Paris within her own mind and simultaneously localize herself as Jane within her own dream, from whose point of view she's able to view what is in fact the activity of her own mind, but she views it as an outside world. So Jane and the streets of Paris are co-created simultaneously in Mary's mind, and are the means by which the potential in Mary's mind manifests as the streets of Paris.
And without dreaming, what is Mary's experience like? Can we put that in words in any way for infinite consciousness. Can you call it experience?
We can. Well, the truest answer to your question is no, we can't. But as a concession to your desire, your legitimate desire to want somehow to know what that experience is, from a human point of view, it's what we call peace. Because when we experience peace or joy or love, what we're actually experiencing is, when Jane, she's walking on the streets of Paris, when she experiences peace, she doesn't realize it, but at that moment, her sense of being a temporary finite self has temporarily come to a halt. What she's experiencing is the nature of Mary's mind. She doesn't, of course, interpret it like this. She doesn't realize it. But at that moment, her mind comes to a stop. When the mind comes to a stop, her belief in herself as Jane comes to an end. And at that moment, the nature of Mary's mind shines in Jane's experience. And then when Jane later refers to that experience, she calls it peace. That's her way of appropriating the nature of Mary's mind and describing it in a way that is consistent with the limitations of her own mind. So she calls it peace and happiness. It's the best we can do. Or joy or love or beauty.
Yeah, I get it. And if that's the best we can do to describe it, it's a beautiful way to do it. Thank you for your compassionate way of conceding to our intellect to be able to describe it in some way that's understandable. It's wonderful. Thank you.